we need to sit up and realise how serious this is, particularly with the date of Halloween itself. So many people will say, oh, it's just a coincidence, it's just a day. But again, I think Satan's plans, he takes dates seriously.
Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of About Abortion. I'm joined this week by Beth Davey, fresh back from her great Welsh tour. Beth, how is it to be back in England?
Well, it's actually a lot wetter here in England than it was in Wales, which is surprising. I was told that the Welsh team don't tend to look at the weather forecast because it's too depressing, but we had lovely sunshine, high weather temperatures, and came back to drizzle and cold. So it's, yeah.
Shameful.
Bad.
It's not what you expect of East Anglia, is it? It's not what you not what you expect. So we'll come on to that more in the second half. But you've been on tour in Wales, and it sounds a bit like a sort of Top Gear tour. But it was something quite different. But were you in the Nissan Micra? Was that your wheels of choice?
Micra, but we did have modified banners, so it did feel a bit like Top Gear, where they modify the cars, we modified the banners, and we're giving them a go. So yeah, a little bit.
Very good. Well, look forward to hearing more about the Great Welsh Tour as we carry on today. But we want to start actually with Halloween, which we don't usually observe on this channel, but this hopefully will be going out on the 31st itself, which is a significant date, isn't it? Generally, spiritually, we know stuff's going on. But this year in particular, there's something genuinely horrific and horrifying going on in our nation that people may not be aware of. So, Beth, can you bring us up to speed? What's going on this very day that people need to know about in our nation?
Yeah, well, it reminds me of George Orwell's 1984 with the thought police and the thought crimes. But actually, this is going to become a dystopic reality here in England. On the 31st of October, here in the UK, buffer zones around abortion facilities are going to become law. They're being referred to as safe access buffer zones, so that women can access abortion safely. Which basically ensures that it's illegal to, in their language, they say intentionally or recklessly influence someone's decision to use abortion services, obstruct them, cause harassment or distress, either to someone going in or to people who work there. I think harassment and intimidation, these things are already illegal. So I'm not too sure what they're trying to add here, but it seems that these are quite vague. The language that they're using has a lack of clarity, and what we'll be kind of talking about a bit more is that what does it actually mean to influence someone within 150 meters of the abortion facilities? It's very vague. It leaves it open to discussion as to whether things like prayer can be influencing someone, even silent prayer, and whether these will be guilty under this new law, which the punishment is unlimited fines. So it's quite serious.
It sounds like they've kept it deliberately open-ended and vague, so that really it can mean anything you want it to mean. And it's interesting you mentioned the Orwellian thing, that it's not just the fact of the sort of thought police element, but it is the use of language as well, isn't it? This Orwellian double speak, safe access zone. What does this mean? This means killing babies and not a chance for anyone to offer help or support or prayer or information at that last moment. There's nothing safe about that, and of course it's removing access. It's removing access from those who would help and those who would give information. It's removing the access that women used to have to that help and information. So it's just the opposite, isn't it, of what it claims to be on the face of it. It's very, very disturbing. And I think even those who are not pro-life have found this disturbing, some, haven't they, in terms of freedom of speech, freedom of religion, yes. And of course, the introduction of thought crime. But can you just clarify something for us? Because this law is changing, you say, today, this evening. But But some people have already been arrested, haven't they, for praying outside clinics? Adam Smith Connor
Yeah.
and Isabel Vaughan Spruce. Maybe it's double-barreled surnames that are going to be criminalised next. There's a pattern here, but they've already got in trouble with the law, haven't they? So what's actually changing today, and how come they've already been in trouble?
Yeah, so some councils have already introduced these buffer zones, but what's really changing is as of October the 31st, 2024, these 150-metre buffer zones around are going to be enforced around every abortion clinic, every private hospital that administers abortions, and even NHS hospitals that carry out abortions. So it's not just going to be restricted to those councils, but it's going to be enforced across the country and anywhere that abortion can be procured. What's interesting is that there is a difference between these two instances. So you mentioned Isabel Vaughan Spruce. She was arrested twice for praying silently outside a clinic. And the result of her case was that she was awarded a £13,000 payout from the West Midlands police for being unjustly treated. So in her case, she was vindicated in silent prayer being allowed outside the clinic. On the other hand, Adam Smith Connor, literally just last week, was in court. He's a military veteran. He was praying silently. He himself had a son that was killed through abortion, which he now regrets. And so he was praying silently outside of the clinic. But he was found guilty, which means that he was basically given a conditional discharge and ordered to pay £9,000 to the Bournemouth Council. So whilst Isabel was acquitted of praying silently, Adam Smith Connor was found guilty, essentially the first thought crime in modern British history. Never before has the court prosecuted a citizen for something that they were doing in their mind, in their thoughts. So you can see here the kind of the vague nature of the law means that it can be interpreted differently in different councils, that just because prayer is covered in one place doesn't necessarily mean that prayer will be allowed in another place. And so it does seem that it's going to be interpreted differently and in different situations.
Incredible, isn't it? Incredible. Yeah, I remember meeting Adam. He turned up at one of our very first conferences, actually, and I think it wasn't long after he had been convicted of that abortion. He had a disturbing dream, I believe. He said, in which it came to him what he had done, what he'd been involved with, and he was convicted, and he sort of vowed there and then to be a part of the movement to see an end to this. So he's been very courageous. Can you talk to us about the spiritual significance of this? As I said, a lot of even pro-choice people are disturbed by this at a sort of rule of law level, at a kind of religious freedom level. But tell us a bit about the spiritual significance. What do you think is going on, and how should this be registering with us as the people of God at this time?
Yeah, well, I think the church really needs to take note. We're living in an age where lots of people are experiencing the blessings of Christendom and all the things that Christianity has brought in. But I think this is maybe one of the first signs that we are truly living in a post-Christian
Mm.
nation where prayer effectively is becoming criminalized in certain parts. And more particularly, those areas where prayer is being criminalized are particularly around those places where children are being killed. I don't think this is a coincidence. I think it's quite strategic on the part of the enemy that if he can't protect, if he can't shield women from being persuaded not to kill their children, he will enforce a ban to be able to stop people from showing the truth, sharing the reality, bringing the light into the darkness. And so it's very interesting that prayer is effectively becoming illegal outside these places of child sacrifice. I think it's helpful to look back in the Bible to see what these places of child sacrifice were then. And in the Old Testament, you see the Valley of Ben Hinnom, or what's also called just Hinnom or Ger Ben Hinnom, which was the place outside Jerusalem where the children were made to pass through the fire, where they were sacrificed to Baal and to Molech. And in the New Testament, we see Ger Ben Hinnom or Gehinnom kind of adulterized into Gehenna. And it's Gehenna that Jesus associates with hell on earth, where he talks about this place of eternal punishment. So there's a connection here between this kind of hell on earth and the place where children are sacrificed. And I think in our land today, these places where children are sacrificed, effectively places of hell on earth. These are the places that Satan is really fighting to protect and to shield from Christianity, from gospel witness, and from prayer. We know that prayer is powerful and effective at tearing down strongholds, and so does Satan. And I think that's quite striking, just in how the enemy knows how powerful prayer is, but sometimes we as the church don't actually take seriously the power of prayer. And so Satan's quite aware that he wants to stop prayer. And the challenge to us is, are we even praying? I think this won't actually affect many of us, because how many of us are genuinely outside abortion clinics? How many of us are really ministering the gospel to these women in crisis places who are seeking for hope? And the only hope that they can find is, maybe an abortion will help this. Maybe this is my only way out. So I think that's quite striking to see how seriously the enemy, the adversary, takes this, compared with how seriously we take it. But coming back to Halloween, sorry, did you want to come in there?
If I may, yeah, I think it's just such an important point to underline. There are all these signals going off for us to see just how significant this is spiritually, and I think the church is still not getting it. We see in Scripture the Lord refers to child sacrifice as basically unthinkable to him. In Jeremiah, he said, Jeremiah 7, it never even entered into my mind that you would do this. There is something so significant about the shedding of innocent blood in this particular way. And that's reinforced again, as you say, when Jesus, as it were, he's looking around, as it were, in the language and the kind of reference points of the day for a word picture for hell itself. And he alights on the place, the burning heap of that dump outside the city where children were sacrificed to Molech. That's kind of one of the key word pictures, as it were, that Jesus uses to describe eternal punishment. And yet the church just, people say stuff like, well, yes, I am pro-life, but, and then what follows is not very much. It doesn't amount to anything. It doesn't bring any real anguish and concern for what's going on. There's very little prayer, often no teaching, zero action. And then again, if we didn't see it from Scripture, you'd see it surely now. The very place, as you say, where child sacrifice is taking place, that's where prayer is criminalized. The enemy wants prayer out of his zone. Again, the enemy knows how significant this is spiritually. Why do we not realize how significant it is spiritually? So, yeah, I think that's just so important what you said, and I think the church really needs to sit up and pay attention to this. This is far more serious than we recognize. Sorry, back to you. You're about to talk about, I think, Halloween.
Yeah, so I mean, just like you were saying, we need to sit up and realize how serious this is, particularly with the date of Halloween itself. So many people will say, oh, it's just a coincidence, it's just a day. But again, I think, in Satan's plans, he takes dates seriously. He knows the significance of them. Is it any surprise that the exact day that abortion zones, buffer zones are being brought in to protect safe places for women to come and kill their children, that it's Halloween? It's the very day that evil is celebrated. And again, I think we've become desensitized in a culture where Halloween and the demonic has become commercialized. It's kind of just set up in the shops. We've put a soft edge to it, kind of almost glamorized satanic rituals and the demonic, to the point where the church again doesn't take it seriously. But from many testimonies of ex-witches who have come into the kingdom of God, we know actually that the other side takes this day very seriously, and that it is a day of key witchcraft rituals to be taking place, curses to be taking place and spoken over areas, territories, lands. And so I do think that there is a connection, that the church again needs to wake up and see the connection between the day that this is being brought in, to protect the shedding of innocent blood in this land. And as long as the church remains blinded to the tactics of the enemy, the longer we'll be immobilized, the longer we won't pray, the longer we won't be fasting, to see these strongholds brought down. Um,
Mm.
so yeah, I think it's so important that we sit up and take note when we see things happening on certain days. Um, these aren't just coincidences. We know that, God never acts coincidentally, but God's always strategic and creating these divine appointments. But equally, we know that the enemy also has his strategies, and so we need to be awake and looking for and discerning what is going on in the spiritual realm. Um, and not just saying, well, it's just a coincidence, it's just a day, there's nothing more going on. Well, we know that our battle is against the powers and the principalities in the heavenly realms. And so we need to have that spiritual discernment to see what's really going on behind some of these things that are coming into effect on earth, in our physical governments, in what we can see here and now, because we know that there is a spiritual reality behind them.
Mm. Absolutely. It's another alarm going off, isn't it? The date. And, I don't know the ins and outs of how the date got determined at a sort of human, sort of fleshly level, but you can be sure that there are Satanists and witches and who knows what else out there celebrating today for that decision that was made. And we're not saying that everyone who has an abortion is engaged explicitly in witchcraft or anything like that, but we do know that Satan has an agenda here. We know that it's a part of satanic rituals, it's part of witchcraft, and whether people are consciously or unconsciously participating in that, child sacrifice is almost as old as time, and Satan is very, very keen on it. We'll hopefully pick up on that more in another episode, because it is important for people to see this. But coming back to what's going on in the nation and the church's response, do you think, Beth, that this is a form of judgment? Is this God's judgment on the nation, this ban of prayer? Is the church under judgment? We know from Scripture, judgment begins with the household of God. Is the church being handed over, as it were, to her prayerlessness? What do you think about that? Do you think this is judgment?
Well, I am quite struck by how little this is going to change anything in the evangelical church. Uh, we might be outraged that there are places where prayer will effectively be banned, um, but we're not praying there anyway. We're not sharing the hope. We're not sharing the gospel. And so, really, we might create a bit of a murmur, but then just go on and continue doing what we were doing quite happily because it's not touched us. And so, in a way, I do think there is an element of judgment in terms of God handing us over to our sins. We see that in Romans 1, don't we? God handing us over to our
Mm.
evil desires. Um, and I think when people are persistently rebellious or hard hearted, there does come a point where God says, well, if this is what you want, this is what you're going to get. And so in that, I do see that there is judgment, that the church has failed to speak out on this issue, has failed to be praying about this issue. And so God has said, well, this is effectively what you've been asking for. This is what you've been hardened your heart to. And so I'm going to allow it further. Sometimes God does that in his mercy so that we can wake up, that we can see the reality of where our sin leads us, and that maybe it might, in his mercy, He withholds his judgment in that sense fully so that we might repent. And so sometimes, and hopefully this time, the church might, in its judgment, realize what it's doing, might wake up and might still repent of this and come to its knees in prayer. So, yes.
Yeah, I do think there is something of a line from the apathy, the prayerlessness of certainly the evangelical church. Uh, there's a line from that to what's just happened. I do think that if we were out praying in great numbers, and if our witness against this evil had been consistent from the start, it'd be a really different situation. I think our retreat from the public square has kind of left a few last men standing quite vulnerable. And it's easy for the enemy to pick them off because, well, the rest of us have basically abandoned them. And interesting that actually it's often Roman Catholics who are the last ones standing, which again should be a challenge to us evangelicals. That I do think we've, Francis Schaeffer, I think it was, said every abortion clinic should have a sign on it saying open by permission of the church. And we could add to that, and sustained by the prayerlessness of the church. The fact that we've not been there, as you say, this law isn't going to change much because, as I've said before, the real buffer zones, the real problem with buffer zones is not what's happening today. It's the buffer zones around our hearts. It's the buffer zones around our pulpits, around our churches, around our Christian conferences. It was interesting this summer. Keswick Convention essentially wanted a buffer zone around their convention. They didn't want us within eyeshot. They didn't want us inside. They didn't want us just outside. They didn't even want us in the town 500 yards away. They didn't want us in Keswick. I just saw an article the other day, members of the council saying they're hoping to work with Keswick Ministries to find a way to keep us out next year. How can we stop these guys from coming? And it's just, wow, okay, that's a buffer zone. And I can't speak for what they all try and do between now and then, but certainly they've attempted to keep us out of their town. And that was quite an extreme example of what we see generally, which is that the buffer zones are actually not legally enforced, but it's the soft totalitarianism and our submission to it, where we actually prefer the quiet continuation of wickedness behind closed doors in a clinic or at home, in homes across the nation. We hate that less than we hate the awkwardness and conspicuousness of public vocal witness against the evil. And so, are we any different? I think we've got to see that we bear some responsibility for how dark our nation is. I'm often struck whenever I think about buffer zones. I'm often reminded of these words from John chapter 9, where Jesus said, "As long as it is day, we must do the work of him who sent me. Night is coming when no one can work. While I'm in the world, I am the light of the world." And those words just kind of come to me again and again as a warning, and something of a kind of a wake-up call. We only have so much time to do certain kinds of work, and we don't know how big that window of opportunity will be. And guess what? Most of us just missed one, because how many of us never went outside a clinic, and now it's illegal? We didn't make the use of that window of opportunity, and now that's closed, essentially. As long as it is day, we must work, do the work of the one who sent us, in Jesus' name. He's the light of the world, but he said to us, we're the light of the world as well. So if the world is looking quite dark, well, maybe it's because we're all shut up inside and we're not doing what we're meant to be doing. So I do think there's something of a wake-up call here. This is on us to some great degree. But tell us, Beth, we talked about one window shutting. Is that the end? Have we lost all opportunity? Is public pro-life activity a thing of the past now? Are we off the hook? Can we just complain a bit, pray a bit, and then sit at home and say, well, I disapprove, but what can be done?
Well, I mean, thankfully we can pray anywhere. And so, as we've both been saying, I do think this should be a wake-up call that should bring the church to its knees in order to pray, particularly for the end of the shedding of innocent blood in this land. And as we said, we know prayer is so powerful because we're not fighting against flesh and blood. We are fighting against the powers and the principalities and the spiritual powers that are at work. And so that is effective wherever we are. We don't have to just be outside the abortion clinics for prayer to be effective and powerful in bringing down this stronghold. Praise God, we can be praying in our churches, in our prayer meetings, in our home groups, in our individual prayer lives, but we need to be praying. So I'm hoping and praying that this will be a wake-up call to get the church praying. We know that from stories of testimonies, during World War II, that people could be praying in one country and see things happening in another country, or people would be on the front line and visions of these people praying would appear to them. So we're not bound by area in that sense. We're not bound by the physical restriction of 150 meters outside an abortion clinic. But we do need to be praying. We do need to be taking up this spiritual weapon of prayer and fighting the spiritual powers that are wanting to enshroud the shedding of innocent blood into this country's law. So that is a big wake-up call that we need to be doing. And whilst prayer is of obviously the utmost importance, we do still have that opportunity to engage with and educate society on what abortion actually is. The thing about the work of CBR UK is that we don't tend to go outside abortion clinics. We tend to go out on the high streets or outside other strategic places like universities or the Keswick Convention, or places like this where there'll be a lot of people that we can actually show the reality of what abortion does to the baby in the womb and the humanity of that life in the womb. And we know that a lot of the time there is an ignorance problem, that people just don't know what abortion is. They don't know what the unborn are. And so it's so important. And we can continue to educate people on that, regardless of whether we're able to go outside an abortion clinic or not. But if we can't go outside abortion clinics, it's so much more important that we educate people before they get there, because we can't rely on people finding out real information at the clinic. We know that there is deception, there are euphemisms, they use terms like product of conception or the pregnancy, or even abortion is a euphemism for what actually takes place. And we know that they hide it, so they won't let the women see the ultrasounds. They won't let them see the reality of their child in their womb. And so we need to reach them before they go to the clinic, before they have to make that decision or that choice, whatever it is. Before they're faced with that, we need to show them this is the reality of your child. This is how developed they are. This is your child in its unique individual human life. And also, this is the reality of what abortion will do to your child. So we have this opportunity still, thank the Lord, that we can still educate people. We still have the freedom to show these images, to speak with people on the street. And I believe the latest figures in 2022 showed that actually 60% of abortions were taking place in homes. So we know that the majority of abortions aren't actually even taking place in these clinics anymore, but actually in people's individual homes. And so we need to reach people where they are, on the street, out shopping, outside places of learning and education, like museums or places like this, where people are going, where they're more likely to see us, to find truth, to be educated on the truth of what's going on, because they may not even be going to the clinics. They may be just phoning up, ordering the pills online, and taking those pills in the silence and the hidden nature of their own homes. So I think abortion education is so important to continue to combat. Yes, we pray. Yes, we continue to fight the spiritual battle, but there is also a very physical battle that needs to be taking place, because as the Bible says, how will they know if no one tells them? And that's the case with the gospel, but it's also the case with other things as well. If all they're hearing is that the unborn children are just a clump of cells that can just be removed like a tumor, that it's nothing more than a heavy period, how will they know if no one tells them? And so we have that
Yeah.
responsibility and that mandate that we need to be the voice for the voiceless. We need to be shedding light on the darkness, exposing the works of darkness, and offering hope to people where they think the only hope is to kill their child. So
Absolutely.
yeah, I would encourage people, any listeners, if you're not part of an education team, if you haven't been trained up in pro life apologetics, now is the time. We need to be educating people, talking with our friends. 1 in 3 women will have had an abortion, which means that everyone listening will know at least one person who's had an abortion. Get trained up so that you can speak to your friends when they're going through, when they're asking these questions, that you know how to defend the life in the womb, that you know how to educate people on what's really going on. So I'd encourage people that it's not too late. You can still do something, but you need to act.
Thank you, Beth. The idea that there are listeners who aren't already trained educators, guys, where have you been? You're missing out. This is where the action is. Seriously, get involved. And what you said, Beth, is absolutely right. More than ever, this is needed. Okay, so if outside the clinics, which was amazingly effective work, lots of babies saved from outside clinic work, we did a bit of it, but other groups have done more of that. But that's no longer legal. All the more need to go upstream and hit the thousands of people that we hit every time we do a display, and get that life-saving information to people ahead of time. So those listening in, you can be a part of this, and we need you to be a part of this more than ever. So please continue to listen as we just talk through a bit more about what that looks like. So first of all, Beth, I'm aware that some of our listeners are relatively new. We had a few more join us over the summer. They may not be aware of what it is we're referring to here. So just tell us, what is a public education display, and what's the sort of impact of it? What kind of numbers are we talking in terms of reach? And what kind of goes down, and what give us some evidence of why it's worthwhile?
Mm. Yeah, so a public education display is where we have trained educators who have been trained in pro life apologetics, how to speak to women who are post abortive as well, to offer hope and healing to them as well. Not just We're not just out there to convict and to judge, as so many people say. We're trained up how to talk to post abortive women, as well as offering pro life apologetics. And then a team of educators go out on the street and they display these banners with images on. We often have a living image and then an image of the same stage of development, but after abortion has been performed. So, for example, when we were out in Wales last week, we had an image of an 8-week living child and then the image of an 8-week aborted child next to each other, so that people can see this is what it looks like when the child is alive, and this is what happens after abortion. And so when we go out on the streets, depending on where we are, we can have a huge reach just on the streets themselves. We've been out in places where a couple of thousand people will walk past and see the images. Often we'll have many conversations engaging people where they'll talk through their position, what it means, what they mean by being pro-choice. We'll ask questions of them to figure out when they believe life begins. We'll talk to them, giving them scientific information and evidence, as well as showing them the images to give them the visible evidence. And often we'll see minds changed and people thinking things through, even if they're not completely transformed 100% on the spot. We talk about putting pebbles in their shoe, kind of getting them to question their own thoughts and their own conclusions, so that when they go away, they're still wrestling with, why do I believe this? Or I can't believe that I actually hold that view. Um, or what do I mean by saying that women should have the choice? What is the choice? The choice to what? And things like this. So we have a huge reach on the streets. As I said, we can have a couple of thousand people walk past the images. And then an even further reach on social media when we share those pictures, and people will come past, even if they're pro-choice, and take pictures and share those images online, even if it's with, an angry caption like, "I can't believe these anti-abortionists were out on the streets today." But just by sharing those images, so many more people will see the reality of what abortion does and see the glorious humanity of life in the womb. And so, just from one display, we can have thousands of people reached with those images, even if we only engage in about 20 conversations one-on-one at a deeper level. The reach can be huge in terms of exposing what's going on under the cover of darkness.
Yeah, and then just occasionally we capture some conversations, don't we, on video,
Mm.
and sometimes those go big as well and reach tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands. Um, and there's a lot of engagement online, which is great. So I've always thought, for a couple of hours work in an afternoon for a team of 5, 10, 15 people, it's amazing the impact that can be made. The ripples and they carry on. People keep coming back to those conversations and images, those videos online for days, weeks to come. So it's such an effective way. There's a huge amount of bang for your buck when you go out and do this work. But when you mentioned there the use of imagery, for those who are not familiar with our work, I know that some think of this as shock tactics,
Mm.
or well, hang on, that's a bit out there. Show the imagery. Is that really the way? Isn't that sort of giving the movement a bad name and so on? Just give us a little bit about why do we use the imagery? Why do we go so graphic?
I think it's important to remember that as long as an injustice remains invisible, society will just tolerate it. It remains acceptable. We don't have to talk about it because we don't have to look at it. But as soon as we expose the injustice by showing the reality of what is really going on, even if it's ugly, even if it's uncomfortable, even if people don't like it and it's difficult, by exposing that injustice, it then has to be dealt with. It can no longer just be tolerated, but people are actually going to have to confront it now and deal with it. So I think in terms of revealing an injustice through imagery, it's not just a radical one-off shock tactic that we're trying to make use of here, but there's a lot of evidence for it and precedents in the history of social reform as well. So you see for slavery, Josiah Wedgwood created that image, "Am I not a brother?" And what is it? "Am I not a brother and a man?"
A man and a brother.
Man and
Yeah.
a brother. To show that, slaves aren't any less than us. They are still human beings. They are fellow men. They are fellow brothers. And by seeing that, as well as other images of, the gory, gruesome execution tactics for slaves in the plantations and things like that, people saw the reality of what was going on, that was being covered up by being kept away from society, by going on across the sea, nothing to do with us. They revealed that, and then slavery became intolerable because they saw the reality of what was going on. And similarly with the civil rights movement, the story of Emmett Till, until his mother had the open casket for his funeral to show the reality of what racism, how racism killed her son, with the gruesome image of him following being abducted and tortured, and the result that had in completely deforming him and killing him. Um, when she exposed that, so many people were motivated to do something about racism. Until then, it had gone on in quiet. It had gone on behind closed doors. People didn't know because they didn't see, or they just ignored it. But when she said, "No, we're going to have an open casket," people are going to see for themselves how racism killed my son. And then that image also went into the newspaper and was shared round further. And the story goes that Rosa Parks sat on the bus thinking about what had happened to Emmett Till when she decided to remain seated. And so, if not for that image revealing the racism, other people wouldn't have been motivated to do something. And you see that as well in our work at CBR UK. I was pro-life in conviction, but I wasn't doing anything about it until I saw for myself what an abortion looked like. I saw the Mary Stopes video where the abortion is inserted into the bit that they, again, very strategically leave out from what will happen when I go to the clinic. And so I saw for myself what abortion did. And having seen that, I couldn't say that I didn't know any longer. I had to do something about it. And so it's not just educating people on what's actually going on. It's convicting people who are already pro-life in thought, but not in deed, to say, if you're serious about this, then you need to be doing something. You can't remain a bystander anymore. Will you be a defender of these people who can't defend themselves?
Thank you. That's really helpful. And if folks want to look more into that, you can go onto our website, go to the resources section, Brephos.org. There's a whole page on the use of imagery, why we use graphic imagery, looking at the biblical case as well, looking at how the prophets use imagery, looking at how the Lord has given us our senses partly for a reason that we can, for the reason that we can respond to injustice. We see and hear injustice just as the Lord himself sees and hears injustice, takes it in hand. So this is not a knee-jerk shock tactic. This is thoughtfully coming right out of the scriptures, right out of the history of social reform, and we see it work, don't we? We'll come back to that at the end, some of the encouraging stories, but just tell us a bit then, what was the Great Welsh Tour all about? What were you up to? Any highlights?
Yeah, so the Great Welsh Tour was about reaching Wales with these images, and we've never actually done a planned campaign in Wales before. So we've had a team in Wales in the West for quite a long time now, but never actually strategically gone to Wales. So what we did was we went to Newport, Cardiff, Bridgend, and Swansea. And in 5 days, we held 11 education displays where we engaged members of the public in discussions, where we showed the images, talked to them on what their opinions on abortion was, when they thought life begins, what they think makes life valuable, and when do we deserve protection as humans. So it was fantastic. It was tiring. But actually, to be able to reach so many people in Wales, which proportionally it's got quite a small population, but still quite a high abortion rate. So we know that this is happening a lot in Wales. We know that a lot of people aren't aware of what's going on. Even when talking with so many people, they didn't realise that pills by post was still actually legal, that even though it had been introduced for COVID, they thought that it had been repealed. And so we were able to say, well, no, actually, it's still legal. They decided to keep that in law. Also telling them about Labour's decriminalisation plans. So many of them were shocked to hear that, because they just aren't aware of these things that are going on in Parliament. So it was really encouraging. It felt like it was very soft, which was interesting talking with you, Dave, afterwards, to hear the different experiences. But before we were going, we were very much praying that, Wales, the land of revival, might be stirred up once again, might be kind of rekindled, not just for pro-life, but also for the gospel, and that the gospel being stirred up might then have an effect on sharing truth and hope in these other areas. And we really did feel that there was a lot more of a softness and an openness, proportionally, in terms of the number of people we engaged with. Normally, you can have maybe one or two conversations on a display, but we were finding regularly that about half the conversations we have either were already open or were willing to be thinking these things through enough that they were willing to change their minds, which was really encouraging.
Amazing. That's really great to hear. And I think there is something, isn't there, of a dynamic between the movement for life and the gospel. These things work together, and I'm often reminded of the closing prophecy, isn't it, of the Old Testament? He will turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, the children to the fathers, speaking of John the Baptist going before the Lord. And there is something of that. I think that often we find the pro-life message can pave the way for a gospel conversation. So that's a really exciting opportunity, and certainly I've spoken with other evangelists, with pastors who've been pleasantly surprised. Where we taught each other that this is a stick in the wheel, this is going to get in the way, it's going to burn bridges, it's bad for the gospel. Actually, this so often generates evangelistic opportunities. So that's something that I want to put out there to any evangelists in particular listening in, those with a heart for sharing the gospel. Get out there with us on the streets, and you'll see what an amazing opportunity. It's easy to share the gospel when you start with these pictures and talking about abortion. But go on, tell us. Well, first off, tell us where in the country have we got teams? We're looking to get people to join teams. Anyone listening on this podcast who's not yet part of a team, here's your opportunity. Listen out to where these teams are, but also if there isn't a team near you, get in touch with us. We're looking to start them. But Beth, tell us, where have we got them?
Yeah, we have quite a lot of teams at the moment, which is fantastic. And at the moment, the focus is being regional. So we have teams in Scotland, they mainly display in Glasgow, the Northeast, which is mainly Durham, the Northwest, which is mainly Liverpool, the West Midlands, which is Birmingham and Coventry, Cambridgeshire, which is mainly Cambridge, Devon, East Anglia, Kent, London, Sussex, Yorkshire, which is mainly in Sheffield, and then Wales and the West, which split their time between Bristol and Cardiff. But at the moment, we're looking at planting a team in the Thames Valley in the Oxford area. For those of you who are listening and who heard about the Scott Klusendorf event, we went out at the beginning of October in Oxford, and it was a really encouraging time. And we've got lots of people who are ready in that area to be mobilized and go out in Oxford.
Amazing. That's great to hear. And just so those are the teams we've got. Do you have to hand, by any chance, what are the next few displays? Are there any dates in the next week or two that people can because people can come and just take a look, can't they? Prior to training up with us, which is all free. We give all our high level apologetics training for free. You're well supported throughout, but people can just come and take a look. And I think that's the best way, to be honest. That's how I got involved. I came out to take a look at a display because I couldn't really have imagined quite what it was and how things went down until I saw it. So I'd encourage people just to go out and take a look. Have you got some dates there, Beth, for the next few?
There's a couple that are coming up in November. A lot of the time, the teams give us the dates a lot closer to when they actually go out. But towards the end of November, we've got a few coming up. One in Lewes in Sussex on the 16th. And then one in Exeter on the 23rd. So both of them on Saturdays. Yeah, if you sign up on the website
Great.
and get trained up, you then get emailed out regularly when displays are going to be taking place.
Brilliant. They tend to be sort of monthly, don't they, in most regions? So
Yeah.
there should be a display near you in the next 4 to 6 weeks, and you can just come out and take a look. That's brilliant. Well, look, before we close, I wonder, Beth, you could just share with us, perhaps maybe from the Welsh tour, just give us a few encouraging stories. What have been some highlights, conversations that take place? I appreciate we may have to anonymise some of the names of conversations that you've had perhaps in Wales, but just paint the picture a bit for us. What kind of stuff goes down that's encouraging that people can kind of get whet the appetite for people who are going to come out as a result of this conversation?
Yeah, we had so many good conversations where we genuinely saw minds changed. So I just had one conversation outside BBC Cymru where a man came up and said, "We're not going to change each other's minds, but I find this interesting." And we stood and we discussed for 15, 20 minutes And by the end of it, he said, well, you've convinced me never to get an abortion. So even though he came saying that he was quite closed-minded, just challenging some of the preconceptions, challenging him on some of his presumptions that he had, and getting him to think through some things had really actually changed for him. Even if he wasn't against abortion in general, it made him think twice about, if he was ever in that position, whether he would no longer consider abortion an option, which is, always a fantastic thing, because you never know what's going to happen in their individual life, and what that might influence. In terms of the images, again, I was talking to some 16-year-old girls outside the Senedd, and they were saying that, yeah, they talked about abortion in their ethics class, and that in different circumstances, different things can be right, and that it's a bit tricky, and it's never always a wrong thing to do. But then I said, well, would you mind looking at these pictures with me? Have you ever seen anything like this? And they said, oh no, I can't do that. That's a baby. And so just for seeing the images
Mm.
got them to change their mind
Mm.
from it being this complex ethical issue that they debate in ethics class to actually being quite clear that that's wrong. You can't do that to a baby, just by seeing the images. So that was a really powerful thing as well, especially as they're 16-year-old girls. They're going up into sixth form and off to university, which we know is the main time that women are having abortions at kind of age 22. We had lots of conversations where people initially said that they were pro-choice, but after having a conversation with one of our educators, they would either come down to the point where they were against the 98% and maybe just making exceptions in the cases of rape or the life of the mother, or they fell into the category where they said, oh yeah, no, abortion should not be allowed after a heartbeat can be detected. And then we'd explain, that the heartbeat begins at 21 days. And so they were going, well, I guess, yeah, abortion shouldn't be allowed after 3 weeks. So lots of people who were kind of reining themselves in from being pro-choice for any reason and in any circumstance to actually know, the majority of the time it's probably wrong, which is a great place to just begin to get them to question, because then you can work on, well, what's the difference in these other circumstances? It's the same child, but what's the difference apart from the circumstances in which they were conceived? So that was incredible as well. And then finally, lots of people say you're traumatizing women, you're traumatizing people who are post-abortive. We just had one story of a lady when we were outside the University of South Wales in Cardiff, who came up to the banners, and she had been trafficked as a teenager. She said her mum had given her a bottle of Jack Daniels and a crochet hook and said, you need to perform this abortion on yourself. She'd been trafficked from a young age, been forced into many abortions, domestically abused. And she came up to the images and she just said, thank you, this helps on my healing journey. And so it's so important, even for women who have had abortions, who have been through that trauma, that they see, these were their children. And that can actually help them in beginning to grieve and recover from what they went through, because so often they don't understand why they're experiencing the grief. If it was just a clump of cells, why do I feel so guilty? Why do I feel so upset? I should be feeling relieved, but actually I'm feeling grieved. And so for her to come up and say, thank you, this is helping my healing journey, was just so powerful, and just shows you that, the shouts of people saying that this traumatizes, actually it helps women to begin to deal with that trauma that's already there. We're not re-traumatizing, we're helping them to begin to deal with that trauma.
Absolutely. The truth is always good, isn't it? It's always beneficial. It's not always easy, but I think anyone who knows anything about healing from trauma would say, well, firstly, you have to face what's happened. You need to not be in denial, try and repaint it. You need to face the reality. And that is part of what our displays do. So it's amazing, isn't it? Again, just 2 or 3 hours, this picture going out in all directions. And those are just the stories we're able to capture. As you said, there are thousands of others who saw the images, who maybe sort of were onlookers and sort of listening in on conversations. And amazing to see the impact. So that's fantastic. Well, look, I want to just close by saying to people, well, actually, I'll add this. I asked you to share what was encouraging. I don't want to put a down on things, but let me tell you what I find most discouraging about displays. What I find most discouraging is when Christians come up to displays, say, love what you're doing, and I say, get involved, and then we never hear from them again. That's what I struggle with most, because if every Christian who came up to our displays enthusiastically and with supportive, positive words, if every one of those, or even just half of those, joined us at any level, the movement would be at a different scale altogether. So can I encourage listeners, please do not be one of those passive pro-lifers. Don't be a sort of supportive bystander. We really need, our teams, we're thin on the ground really in some parts of the country. We genuinely need more people just to carry on with some of our teams. And of course, the more people, the more displays we can do, the more thousands of people we can reach every single time. So please do just, at very least, go out and watch a display, go and meet the people, see what goes down. Go to cbruk.org/join. We'll put the link underneath. In fact, we always do in all of these episodes. We always leave that link because we want people to join the movement. We don't want this to just be a talking channel. We want people to be encouraged and spurred on to action. So please go to that link, and that'll just get you information about training and displays near you and so on. That's the first step. Just go to that link. Please don't be a bystander. That's just the message of every social reform movement is, as long as bystanders stand by, the injustice rolls on. But once people start making that journey from being a bystander to being a defender, to actually doing something, well, we know that the days of injustice are numbered. So please join the movement, join while there's opportunity, join while there's still such great need, and before it becomes the socially acceptable thing to do, and be a part of the movement to end this injustice. Thank you so much, Beth. Thanks all for listening, and we look forward to seeing you next week.